What would you do if the quietest man in the room turned out to be the most dangerous?
He took down 3 attackers in 10 seconds and walked out of the steam like a ghost. No rage, no blood, just silence. What would you do if the quietest man in the room turned out to be the most dangerous? The day Wei Jiang walked through the rusted gates of Irongate Penitentiary, no one noticed. He didn't carry the weight of arrogance like the others, no tattoos screaming territory, no eyes scanning for enemies. Just a small, tired-looking man with soft features and a barely there frame, clutching a brown paper bag with his only belongings. His shoes were worn, his clothes too clean. He looked like he didn't belong. An immigrant with broken English and a quiet, almost submissive way of moving, bowing his head slightly when people passed, avoiding eye contact, always whispering, "Sorry." To the inmates hardened by time, violence, and survival, Wei wasn't a person. He was prey. "Look at this little guy," someone muttered during intake. "He won't last a week." In the mess hall, all eyes found him. He sat alone, gently placing his tray on the table, picking at the food as if he didn't quite know what it was. Across the room, a storm was already brewing. Rico, the pit bull Martinez, the undisputed king of Irongate, had noticed him too. Rico was the kind of man who fed off fear, stocky, tattooed from neck to fists, with a history of breaking jaws and souls. No one challenged Rico. He ruled the yard, the showers, the cells, with fists and intimidation, and now he had found his next toy. That first day, Rico passed by Wei's table, slapped the tray from his hands and leaned in close. "Welcome to Irongate, grasshopper," he sneered. "You eat after I eat." Wei blinked, then softly nodded. "Okay." No one intervened. A few laughed. One guard looked away. That's how it started, quietly. But what no one knew, not Rico, not the guards, not even Wei himself, was that this moment, this simple act of humiliation, would change everything. And it wouldn't take long. In Irongate, survival wasn't about strength, it was about dominance. And Rico Martinez had perfected the art of ruling through fear. He ran the yard like a wolf among sheep. If you crossed him, even by accident, you paid, sometimes with your dignity, sometimes with your teeth. He'd earned his nickname, the Pit Bull, by mauling a rival gang member so brutally in the laundry room that they found blood inside the dryer vent. Since then, no one dared to look him in the eye, and now Rico had found a new form of entertainment, Wei. To Rico, it wasn't just about bullying. It was about reminding everyone that Irongate belonged to him, that no one, especially a soft-spoken foreigner, could enter his world without paying a price. Day after day, the taunts escalated. It started with shoulder checks in the hallway. Then came the nicknames: Chopsticks, Bamboo Boy, Rice Packet. Laughter followed Rico everywhere he went, and Wei became the joke everyone was afraid to stop laughing at. In the shower block, Rico would shove Wei's towel to the ground and make him pick it up over and over, while others watched in silence. During chow time, he'd dump water on Wei's food and dare him to eat it anyway. Wei never retaliated. He only bowed his head, muttered, "I'm sorry," and walked away. The silence made Rico bolder. One afternoon, as Wei stood in line for medication, Rico approached from behind, reached over his shoulder, and slapped the pills out of the nurse's hand. "I think my boy here needs a new prescription," he growled, his voice heavy with mockery. "Something for courage." Wei just looked down at the spilled pills and sighed. The nurse didn't say a word. The guard nearby turned his back. It was understood. Wei was on his own. The inmates watched, but none dared to speak. Some pitied him. Most were just relieved it wasn't them. To them, Wei was weak, timid, harmless. But inside that silence, a fire had begun to stir. A fire Rico couldn't see. Not yet. It wasn't the pain that hurt the most. It was the silence. Every slap to the back of his head, every shove into a wall, every tray flipped to the ground. They all echoed louder because no one ever said a word. Not the guards, not the inmates, not even the chaplain who walked past Way one morning while Rico's boys knocked his books from his hands. That silence became its own form of violence. Even the walls seemed to look away. Way continued his days without complaint. He swept the corridors. He folded sheets in the laundry. He sat alone during meals and read from a torn book of Taoist philosophy during yard time. He spoke only when spoken to, never raised his voice, never made demands. But deep inside, memories stirred. He remembered the hills of Henan, the bitter cold mornings before sunrise, the calloused hands of his shifu clapping in rhythm as young monks stood in horse stance until their legs trembled, the sting of bamboo on his shoulders when he faltered, the precision of the breath, the sacred vow he made as a child, "My hands are not for hurting." He had left that world behind. When his temple was destroyed during a violent political crackdown, Way had fled with nothing but his memories and his discipline. He thought prison would be his lowest point, a price for staying silent during the wrong protest, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. But this was something different. Way never cried. But one night, alone in his cell, staring up at the cracked ceiling, he whispered in Mandarin, "How long must a man endure before the world believes he is alive?" That same night, Rico sent a warning. 2 of his crew cornered Way in the laundry room. No guards, no cameras, just bleach, steam, and steel silence. They didn't speak, just cracked their knuckles and closed in. One held Way while the other punched him in the ribs, again and again. But Way didn't fight back, he didn't scream. He just stared at the wall, unmoving, breathing slow and steady like he'd been trained. When they left, laughing, one of them spit on the floor. "He ain't gonna last," he said. But as Way slowly stood, holding his side, his hand brushed against a folded white cloth in his pocket, a worn headband from years ago. He hadn't looked at it in months. Now he unfolded it gently. The red symbol embroidered in the center was faded, but still clear: Shin, heart, spirit. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. The vow was still alive, but so was he, and something in him had started to shift. The days that followed were quieter. Way kept moving like always, sweeping, folding, breathing, but something was different. He walked with the same soft steps, but his eyes no longer looked at the ground. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was simply aware. Aware of the way Rico's crew circled him in the yard like hyenas. Aware of the cameras that conveniently turned away during certain hours. Aware of how long it took a guard to respond when someone cried out. Awareness, the first lesson of his training. At night, while others slept, Way stood in the far corner of his cell, eyes closed, body still, except for his hands. Slow, fluid movements, circular, precise, like wind weaving through water. Old forms from another life, forgotten by most, etched into his bones. He didn't do it for show, he didn't even know if anyone saw, but someone did. Dante, a young inmate who mopped the halls at night, watched from the shadows. What is that?" he asked one night, almost afraid to break the silence. Way opened his eyes. "Breathing," he said softly, "with purpose." Dante blinked. "You a fighter or something?" Way shook his head. "I was a student, a long time ago." Dante didn't press, but he didn't stop watching either. Rumors began to drift. They started small, a whisper here, a question there. Someone claimed they saw Way balance on one foot for an hour without moving. Another said he caught a tray before it hit the ground, without even looking. Most laughed it off. Some began to wonder. But Rico grew restless. He could feel something shifting, not just in Way, but in the air around him. The silence that once fed his power now felt uneasy. The men laughed less. They glanced at Way too often. So he planned something final, something that would end this curiosity before it became respect. A setup, no witnesses, no mercy, the showers. No guards would patrol for at least 15 minutes. He made sure of it. He chose 3 of his strongest boys, ones who owed him favors, who weren't afraid of blood. "We end this tonight," Rico growled. Meanwhile, Wei stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching the dusk roll in, the wind pressing against the fence like it wanted out. His hands were steady, his breath slow. He felt it coming. And he was ready. The steam curled like smoke in the narrow shower block that night, thick, wet, suffocating. Most of the inmates had already finished. Only Wei remained, washing slowly, unaware, or so it seemed. 3 shadows entered behind him. No words, no noise, just purpose. Rico followed last, arms crossed, eyes cold. Wei turned slightly, glancing in the foggy mirror. He saw them. One on the left, one near the back wall, one behind, trapped. Rico gave a nod. The first man lunged, fist raised, but before it landed, Wei stepped sideways, spinning with ghost-like speed. His elbow found the attacker's chest, folding him in half. A precise twist of the wrist followed, not loud but sharp enough to echo off the tiles. The man dropped, breathless, holding his arm. The second attacker came from behind, swinging a broken broom handle. Wei ducked, turned under it, grabbed the man's shirt and pulled, using the attacker's own weight to slam him into the wet concrete. 2 down. Rico cursed. "You gotta be kidding me." The third man hesitated, looked at the others on the floor, then charged anyway. Rage, overpowering logic. Wei's body became water. He moved like he was dancing, a graceful sidestep, a parry with his forearm, then a palm strike straight to the man's sternum, enough to knock the wind out of him without breaking a bone. The man hit the wall and slid down, groaning. 3 down. All in under 10 seconds. Only Rico remained. He stepped forward slowly, disbelief warping his face. "What the hell are you?" Wei stood calmly, steam rising around his shoulders like smoke around a temple statue. "I am someone who asked to be left alone." Rico charged, fists flying wild, years of street fighting and prison brawls powering his fury. But Wei had seen better, trained harder, waited longer. Every punch missed, by inches. Wei dodged, blocked, redirected, calm, silent. Then came a single, devastating strike. Not to Rico's face, but to his balance, a sweep of the leg. Rico's body lifted from the ground and hit the floor with a heavy thud. Wei stepped over him. "I didn't come here to fight," he said softly, kneeling beside him. "But even a monk will raise his hand if the silence becomes injustice." Rico tried to speak, but couldn't. His pride lay shattered beside his bruised ribs. And then the sound, gasps, footsteps. Inmates had gathered at the entrance, a few guards too. No one had intervened, but everyone had seen. Wei stood tall, wrapped a towel around his waist and walked past them. No one said a word. But the silence now carried a different weight, respect. The next morning, Irongate was different. The same grey walls, the same clang of metal doors. But something had shifted, something no one could quite explain, except for the bruises still coloring Rico's face and the silence in his usually loud mouth. Wei walked through the corridors like he always had, quiet, head slightly bowed, hands behind his back. But now, eyes followed him with something new, not ridicule, reverence. Inmates who had once mocked him now stepped aside. Some nodded in acknowledgement, others lowered their gaze, ashamed of the laughter they'd once joined. Even the guards, once indifferent, glanced at him with a trace of curiosity and caution. No one asked questions, they didn't need to. The legend had begun to write itself. They say he broke 3 bones and didn't even raise his voice. No, I heard he never touched them, just looked at them and they fell. You think it's kung fu, some Shaolin thing? Dante, the young inmate who had watched Wei train at night, walked beside him now. Not as a follower, not as a guard, but as a student. "Will you teach me?" he asked quietly one day in the yard. Wei didn't answer at first. He simply placed his hand over his heart, then extended it outward, a gesture of offering, of balance. From that day on, a small group began to gather each morning at sunrise, not to fight, not to learn violence, but to understand control, breath, focus, discipline. It started with 4 men, then 7, then 12. Men who had once led with fists now sat cross-legged in silence, breathing beside Wei under the pale morning light. Even Rico, still limping slightly, watched from afar. Something in his eyes had softened, not with weakness, but with confusion, reflection, maybe even regret. The man who had once ruled with fear now sat alone at lunch, but not bitter, not plotting revenge, just thinking. The prison had not changed, but its rhythm had, and in the center of it all was a man no one could understand, and no one dared to underestimate again. Wei had never wanted power, but now he had something far greater: respect. At Irongate, change didn't come easy. Men were carved from stone there, hardened by time, by betrayal, by the kind of silence that eats a man from the inside out. But slowly, like water carving through rock, something began to shift. Wei didn't speak much. He didn't tell war stories or boast about what had happened in the showers. He never brought it up again. And that's exactly why they listened. Each morning, his meditation group grew. Men who had once traded in violence now sat still for 20 minutes straight, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm. The same hands that had once stabbed, punched, and stolen now rested on their knees, still, calm, human. Even the guards started arriving early to watch. One of them, Officer Reed, a thick-skulled man with years of cynicism behind his eyes, stopped Wei one afternoon after a session. "Whatever it is you're doing," he grumbled, "keep doing it." "The block's quieter than I've ever seen it." Wei only bowed his head slightly in thanks, but the most unexpected shift was still to come. One afternoon, Rico showed up, not with his crew, not puffed up or snarling like before. He stood on the edges of the yard, watching as the others breathed in unison, sitting cross-legged in a circle around Wei. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. Then on the 3rd day, he sat. No one reacted, but everyone noticed. His eyes were open the whole time, his body stiff, unsure, but he stayed through the silence. And the next day, and the next. On the 5th day, after the session ended, Rico lingered. Wei looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, just presence. "I didn't know," Rico said, voice gravelly. "I thought you were—" "Nothing," Wei responded softly. "Most people do." Rico nodded, as if swallowing a truth he'd never faced. "You didn't have to let me live." Wei looked him in the eye. "And you didn't have to change." It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't dramatic. But in that moment, the pit bull bowed his head, not in defeat, in recognition. In a place where men were expected to rot, to become monsters, something extraordinary had begun. Not just order, not just peace, growth. It started with pain, then respect. Now, redemption. Years passed. Wei remained behind bars, not as a prisoner, but as something else entirely. A teacher, a guide, a reminder that not all who are silent are broken. His cell became a place of quiet visits. Men would stop by, ask a question, confess something they'd never said aloud. He never judged. He never gave orders. He simply listened, and sometimes showed them how to breathe. Outside, the world forgot about Irongate. It always did. But inside, there were changes. Fights dropped by nearly half. A new warden, hearing about the odd shift in Block C, authorized official meditation sessions twice a week. Not because he believed in them, but because the numbers didn't lie. Guards reported fewer injuries, fewer lockdowns. Some even said the air felt different. And one day, the biggest surprise of all, Rico Martinez was released. He walked out through the same gate where years before he had laughed at a small man with broken English. Now he walked out quietly, no entourage, no bravado. Just a single folded note in his hand given to him that morning. From Wei. He opened it only once he was outside. It read, "Strength without control is destruction. Control without heart is emptiness. Heart, that's where the power lives." Rico folded the note and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't know what life would be now, but he knew this. He was not the man who walked into Irongate years ago. And Wei stayed behind, still quiet, still soft-spoken. But no one ever looked at him the same way again. He had entered the prison as prey. He became its calmest storm. And the legend of the silent monk in Block C lived on, not because of the fight, but because of what followed. In a place designed to break men, he taught them how to become whole again. And if this story touched you in any way, tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Wei's place? Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked, how you spoke, or where you came from? Your voice matters. Share it, because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that change the world.